All right, I'm here with David Burns. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm excited to talk to you because you're considered one of the forefathers of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and just to sort of lay the groundwork for this discussion we're going to have here, it might be useful to have like some kind of definition of that. It seems like it's about your thoughts and moods, but what does that mean
Yeah.
exactly?
Well, yeah, right. Uh, yeah, the cognitive therapy, I meant something kind of a new version of cognitive therapy, by the way,
Yeah.
from the original Feeling Good book. But the idea behind cognitive therapy goes back a couple thousand years, maybe even more, but to the Greek philosopher Epictetus, who made a revolutionary statement that is actually valid, but it's so basic that most people can't comprehend it, and is that human beings are disturbed not by things, but by the views we take of them. That was his statement in his book, Enchiridion, or something like that, that he published almost 2,000 years ago. And what it means is that we create our own emotional reality at every moment of every day. We think, oh, I'm upset because my boyfriend rejected me, or my girlfriend rejected me, or whatever it is, or I'm depressed because I'm not smart enough, I'm not successful enough, or uh, I was talking to a woman last night who said I'm depressed and guilty. I'm a bad mother because I sometimes get irritable and snap at my kids, and that it's these thoughts that create 100% of depression and anxiety and even anger. It's not what's happening to us, and it's true even at this moment. The people listening to this podcast will everyone's getting exactly the same words from David and exactly the same words from Duncan, but people will have a wide variety of emotional reactions depending on your thoughts. And if you're thinking something like, well, I don't know, this idea that thoughts create our moods in the here and now, that sounds like a lot of BS. Burns must be I know he's taught at Harvard and he's teaching at Stanford, but he sounds like an ass, you know. So they're thinking, feeling annoyed or skeptical.
Right.
And then other people may be saying, wow, he's saying he's got new high-speed treatment for depression by changing the way you think, and that might be really helpful to me. I've been struggling with depression for years or decades, so that person might be feeling really happy and excited,
No.
and so that's the first idea. And then the second idea came along in the 20th century. The idea that our thoughts create our moods, and people have been talking about, for hundreds and hundreds of years. But the second thing came along from the work of Albert Ellis in New York, Karen Horney, an early psychoanalyst who was active in the early 1900s, in the mid 1900s, and then Aaron Beck, who I kind of got my start with at University of Pennsylvania Medical School, was the idea that the thoughts that upset you, the thoughts that cause depression and anxiety, are cons. They're distorted. They're not realistic.
Mm.
And in my first book, Feeling Good, the new mood therapy, I published the 10 so-called cognitive distortions, which is overly fancy language, but a cognition is just a thought. And then there's these thinking errors that cause depression, like all or nothing thinking. Like the mother I was talking to last night is into all or nothing thinking because I got mad and shouted at my kids. I'm a bad mother. That's
Right.
all or nothing thinking. And then another one, and it's a distortion because nothing in the universe is black or white. It's not 100% or 0%. This podcast is unlikely to be the greatest podcast in human history,
Yes.
and it's not going to be the worst piece of crap in human history. It'll be somewhere in between, and we're always somewhere in between. And then there's overgeneralization, taking a negative event and seeing it as a never-ending pattern of defeat. A young uh, a professional woman broke up with her boyfriend of 2 years. He broke up with her, and then she was feeling devastated because she told herself, "Dr. Burns, does this mean I'm unlovable?"
Mm,
And so she's generalizing from this specific event. Well, we all break up with people along the way
yeah.
when we're trying to find the person to settle down with. But she's generalizing to herself. She thinks she has a self that's unlovable, and then she's generalizing to the future. I'll be alone forever, instead of focusing on what really went on. The specific thing that went on was just that she has a way of relating to people. For the most part, she's an extremely popular and terrific young woman. Uh, she's a powerhouse. She's a professional with a fabulous career. She's funny. She's warm. She's attractive. She's really neat. But what really went on, she sometimes gets overly enthusiastic and will say to like a friend, let's go to Vancouver for spring break. What do you think about it? There's going to be a great rock concert there, and the so and so is going to perform, and then the other person she'll say, what do you think? Doesn't that sound like fun? And then the other person will say, oh yeah, that sounds cool. And then she takes that as that they really want to do it. So she'll start making hotel reservations.
Um,
And then at the last minute, she discovers the other person isn't that hot on going to Vancouver, and it causes a conflict. And that's what happened with her boyfriend. And that was a fairly easy problem to correct.
yeah.
But on the specific level, you can't get depressed. It's impossible to be depressed without overgeneralization, generalizing to yourself. All of depression is about thinking you have this self that isn't good enough. And then you've got mental filtering and discounting the positive, and mind reading and fortune telling and should statements and self-blame and emotional reasoning. I feel like a loser, so I must be a loser. I feel hopeless, so I must be hopeless. Uh, and so that's principle number two. Depression and anxiety are the world's oldest cons. And then the third idea is that, and this was also radical, is that the very moment you stop believing the distorted thoughts that are causing your angst, in that very instant, you'll recover. Your emotions will change.
Mm,
And so that was what I wrote about in my first book, Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy, that was published in 1980. And when I wrote it, because I was just excited because I wanted to share these ideas with people because they were considered pretty revolutionary at the time, and most people thought it was quackery. There were only about 15 of us cognitive therapists in the world at that time.
wow.
And then since Feeling Good came out, cognitive therapy has grown in popularity, and now it's the most popular form of psychotherapy in the world and the most extensively researched form of psychotherapy in the world. It's considered the gold standard for the treatment of depression.
Yeah.
But then I moved to Stanford Medical School. We moved back home to California in the mid 1990s. And then since I've been at Stanford, I've developed kind of a new twist that we call team CBT, or team cognitive therapy, which is like cognitive therapy on steroids, and brought in new dimensions, new techniques, and now are seeing what I dreamed about when I was a young man. Uh, I always wondered when I was doing my psychiatric residency, and we treated people, we gave them antidepressants and just encouraged them to talk. And that was all the treatment amounted to. And I almost never saw people recover, and they would go on for months and months without changes, and no one was measuring anything, and it was just this vague thing. And a lot of psychotherapy and psychiatry is still that kind of ineffective, vague thing. But I wondered, could you ever get really good at psychotherapy, like an NBA player, like you know, Curry from the Golden State Warriors. He's one of the
Yeah.
greatest shooters in human history. And he has shot thousands of times. And each time he shoots, he can see if it goes through the hoop or not.
Right.
Ever since he's probably 5 years old, he's been doing that. And that shapes his brain. But therapists don't measure. So they just keep doing the same dumb thing over and over again, thinking they're helping people when in most cases they're not. And so we now measure at the start and end of every session with every patient, how are you feeling right now? How depressed, how suicidal, how angry, how anxious. And then at the end of the session, so I can see instantly within a session how effective or ineffective I was.
Yeah.
And that has revolutionized the treatment. And now we're seeing, I usually see people for 2 hour sessions, and at least 90% of the time now, I see a complete recovery in one session, and then I'm done with the patient. And that's what I dreamed about
Yeah.
when I was young. Would such a thing be possible to develop a science of psychotherapy? So that's the overview of my career. And then the new book that you can see in the background, although if
Feeling
it's a
great.
podcast, you
Yeah.
can't, yeah, see it. But it's, Feeling Great came out in September, and that's kind of the first major sequel to my first book, Feeling Good. And that has all these new techniques, mind-boggling techniques, to my way of thinking, that are just really revolutionizing what's possible for people with depression and anxiety in terms of speed and degree of recovery.
And let me ask you, because you said in the beginning where people treated it as quackery. And I myself, if I had known that this was so extensively studied and well regarded and respected, and someone was saying, oh, we can have someone's mood change around within 2 hours, I would blow it off myself.
Right,
But
right, yeah.
you
Exactly.
think
It sounds like quackery.
it does. But for people who are curious about this, for if they want to find a therapist that's doing team CBT, do you guys have like a network or
They do. I work alone,
okay,
but my students, with my blessing, have formed a Feeling Good Institute in Mountain View, California, and they're now forming, institutes around the U.S. and around the world, really, and they have a pretty extensive referral network. But my website, feelinggood.com, has free resources.
okay,
Like my own Feeling Good podcast, we're going to have our 4 millionth download month after next,
there you go.
and it's for therapists and for the general public to learn how to use these techniques yourself. And my books, like Feeling Good, even the one that came out in 1980, there's been research on it. It's still, uh, if you read that book and you're depressed, there's a high likelihood you'll be dramatically improved or recovered in 4 weeks, even without any human therapist, without any medications. And I've got a free depression class, kind of for people to take on the website. I've got a free anxiety class, because a lot of people just don't have the money, and a lot of therapists are just so darn expensive and ineffective. And so and then the new free Feeling Good app that I'm creating too,
Yeah.
is another attempt to kind of put these things in the hands of people, these tools. And therapists are great, but I think there's an awful lot one can do even without a human therapist.
And on that note, then, it seems like there's a lot of people who are prescribed drugs for depression and
Yeah,
anxiety, like drugs like Xanax, which
yeah.
I know people have taken it just recreationally, and it turns you into a zombie. Like, do you think it is? Are there any cases where these drugs are necessary, or do you think it's
Well, I'll give you
irresponsible the way
my
that?
take on it because
Sure.
I started out doing research on brain chemistry after during my fellowship part of my residency training in psychiatry, on this idea that there's some chemical imbalance in the brain and you have to take antidepressants to correct that. And I won awards for my research on neurochemistry, but I I never found any evidence supporting the chemical imbalance theory. The idea, oh, there's this happy chemical, serotonin, and you don't have enough of it, and that's why you're depressed. We flooded the brains in our research unit of depressed patients with serotonin, raised their serotonin levels probably 100 times in the brain from normal. It had no effect on their mood whatsoever. It was just a spurious theory that somebody made up, and it's the basis of $1 billion industry. All the drug companies, they make serotonin stimulating drugs of various kinds, and they call them antidepressants, and they market them heavily. But a critical review of that research uh, indicates, and some listeners will hate hearing this, but my own research, published research, and other people, David Antonuccio in Reno, or Irving Kirsch at the Harvard Placebo Institute, have indicated that the drugs called antidepressants actually are not antidepressants. They're just chemicals with side effects. And if you look at the data critically, you'll see they really do not outperform placebos.
Wow.
And so I no longer use them. I haven't prescribed an antidepressant in 25 years. Now, prior to that time, I was still kind of a believer because that's the way I was trained as a psychiatrist. And
Right.
I've prescribed them on 13,000 occasions, not because I recommended them, but because patients asked for them. And I thought, well, if I don't prescribe it, I might get sued or something.
Yeah.
But I no longer uh, consider them to be necessary or desirable in the treatment of depression. Now, you mentioned Xanax. That's not an antidepressant, that's an
Right.
anti-anxiety agent. And it is kind of like a magic bullet for anxiety. And if you're anxious and having trouble getting to sleep and you take the smallest dose, quarter milligram Xanax, and you chew it and swallow it with water, that it'll go right into your blood quickly. You'll fall asleep in 20 minutes. You'll sleep like a baby, and you'll wake up feeling great with no side effects. You'll say, "Oh wow, this is better than French fries." But but the problem is, if you take it for more than 2 or 3 days, you'll start getting hooked on it,
Yeah.
and then when you try to withdraw from it, you'll have intense anxiety and intense insomnia, the very reason you started taking it. And then you and your doctor will wrongly conclude you need it, and it will become an addiction. And I had a colleague in Canada, a research psychologist, Dr. Henny Westra, a really bright person, a great researcher, and also a great clinician. And she reviewed the world literature on the use of these benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax and Librium and Ativan and all the rest of them, and concluded that uh, treatment with cognitive therapy greatly outperforms treatment with benzodiazepines,
Mm.
and that benzodiazepines, after a few days, they're not effective, and they actually make it impossible to recover from any anxiety disorder.
Mm.
And so I will not prescribe them for anything, but they're wonderful. I took Xanax myself for about a month when it first came out, because when drugs first come out, the companies make claims that later on are shown to be not true.
Yeah.
But it was said, oh, this is not addictive and this is great for whatever ails you. And I would take it at night, and I thought, oh, this is great. And then I realized it was becoming addictive, and I said, I'm going to stop taking this, and took 3 weeks to withdraw from it.
Yeah.
So I have so many power. I just did a lecture on drug-free, a free lecture. I might even post it on my website, feelinggood.com. It was an hour lecture and a 30-minute Q&A that the people who published my book, Feeling Great, set up this free lecture for the general public. And I showed cases of extreme anxiety, people who recovered really, really rapidly without medications at all. And so when someone has depression or anxiety, my goal is to have that person recover really fast. The techniques for depression, the techniques for anxiety, there's a little overlap, and some important differences. But I I uh, I just turned away from biological psychiatry, although I was trained in it and kind of I believed in it because that's what I was told, and I want to be a good student.
Right.
But sometimes medications are life-saving. I've never been opposed to medications. I've only been opposed to medications that don't work.
Fair enough. And one of the things that's strange in this era that we're living in is, and you talk about this in your book, um, Feeling Good, where relying on other people's perception of you to form your own sense of self-worth. And yet we're living in an era of social media where it's very easy to get addicted to the likes and the follows, etc. Your social media, by definition, your life is media. You're always on view. um, how do people how do you think people should engage with social media, or like its anxiety producing effects?
Well, I don't give advice on social media or
Fair
on much
enough.
of anything, actually, but you're right that uh, the approval addiction is one of the self-defeating beliefs that trigger depression and anxiety. I have a list of 23 self-defeating beliefs, and if you post show notes or something, I'd be glad to send you a
Sure.
copy of it, and people can look through this list. It's just a one-page thing with brief definitions, and there are certain common beliefs that people have that set us up for depression and anxiety. There's the, approval addiction. I need everyone's approval to be happy and worthwhile. And then there's a love addiction. I must be loved to feel happy and worthwhile. And then there's perfectionism, perceived perfectionism. People won't love and accept me if they see that I'm flawed or vulnerable. I have to impress people to be loved or liked or respected. And then there's the achievement addiction, basing your self-esteem on your achievements and accomplishments. And a lot of these other self-defeating beliefs. And they're like two-edged swords because on the one hand, they can motivate us. I used to be very perfectionistic and achievement addiction, and it drove me in my research because I would say this research study, this has got to be the greatest study in the world on this topic. And then if it looked like the data was coming out right, I would get ecstatic. Oh, this is fantastic. And then if the data was coming out bad, I would crash. And, it was like being on a roller coaster. And the same in my clinical work. I used to tell myself that I'm going to cure every patient, whether they like it or not. And then I'd have these patients with really severe problems like borderline personality disorder, and they'd say, "Dr. Burns, you're not helping me," and it would threaten my sense of self-esteem because I can't fail, and that would kind of lead to a power struggle, and I try to prove that the patient was wrong and I was helping them or I could help them, and then over time I got over that, and I can remember the day a patient said, "Dr. Burns, you're not really helping me," and feeling like I'm maybe I'm a hopeless case, and I said, you're right. And it's heartbreaking to me
Yeah.
because I haven't been helpful to you, and I'm not even connecting with you in a really warm and empathic way. And I can imagine how angry and hopeless and disappointed you feel. I think we're on the same page. Let's talk about it. I want to hear what you have to say. And then suddenly the heavens opened up, the patient started trusting me, and then suddenly began to recover. But these traps, these self-defeating beliefs, uh, they're always rewarding us. Like if you have that approval addiction, you may get very good at getting people's approval, and then each time you get some approval, you get kind of euphoric, so you get addicted to these beliefs. So part of what I do in my books, like Feeling Good, the Feeling Good Handbook, Feeling Great, is show people how to modify these beliefs so you can keep the healthy stuff. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do a great job or loving achievement and trying to do the finest job you can do, but getting rid of the downside,
Right.
the kind of needy, aspect. I must have achievement to be worthwhile. Well, that's just so nonsensical. I uh, we adopted a cat at the Humane Society. It was a 6-year-old cat who whose owner had died, and my wife saw her and fell in love with the picture, and we went and we brought her home, and we just love her, and uh, you know, she glommed onto my wife. I'm kind of like a grade B option for her, but she's getting more attached to me now, and uh, I'll start petting her, and she rolls over on her back, and she spreads her hands and her legs like this, and I start petting her tummy, and she just starts purring like crazy, and that's such a joyous experience. And she's not perfect. She's not a show cat. And I'm kind of getting old, and I'm kind of noticing all of my defects. I'm not special. She's not special, but just hanging out is really special. And the idea is to let go of these rules that we have of how we have to be, and and to accept yourself with all of your flaws. And that's really what enlightenment is. That's what the Buddha was talking about 2,500 years ago. And Buddhists hate it when I talk like this because they think I don't have any right to talk about Buddhism because I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not in anything.
Yeah.
But it's really, that's where I'm trying to bring people in therapy, is not just to get rid of the depression and anxiety, but to go into a state of what you would call enlightenment. But you can't be enlightened all the time.
Yeah.
I say you're only entitled to 5 happy days per week and 2 miserable days, because once you've recovered, those negative thoughts will come back. But now you'll have the tool that you can blow them away whenever they come back.
Mm.
Uh, but that's kind of how it works. And if you're on the internet, I don't have much I just don't have any expertise there. Just
Right.
the rules that govern human existence are the same before and after the internet. For me, the internet has been a blessing, a little bit of a curse, but a blessing because now in my teaching, for example, it's all virtual because of COVID.
Right.
And so my Stanford group, I used to do it live at Stanford. Now I do it virtually. And all kinds of students that I loved and taught who moved away now have
Mm.
come back.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
they're in the Tuesday group, the training group again. And so I think the internet can do fantastic things for us, but and also, it connects me with a lot of the podcast fans, and they email me,
Right.
and I can make personal connections with people all over the world. But it's also a curse because I'm over 10,000 emails behind right now. And I'm sure
Yeah.
almost everyone has a similar problem. You can't keep up.
Well, and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you when you talk about Buddhism is this, and you mentioned this early on when we were talking, is this concept of self. Like a lot of
Yeah,
people are able to apply the advice and the techniques you're talking about when they see it in others, when they see
yes,
someone
right.
who they know
Yeah,
is great and is having a bad
yeah,
day and catastrophizing, they say, well,
yeah,
hang on. But when it comes
yeah,
to ourselves, this ego,
yeah.
how important is it, and are there any techniques to sort of reduce our ego intensity?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what the new team CBT is about. That resistance that we have. We see others' distortions and self-criticisms as being kind of unproductive, but when it comes to your own self-criticisms, there's a part of you that doesn't want to let go. For example, the woman I was working with last night said, I realize I beat up on myself, and I say I'm a bad mother, and I feel incredibly guilty. I shouldn't have shouted at my kids, and I know I shouldn't be beating up on myself, but partly, uh, you know, I don't want to let go of that self-abuse. And that's a motivational dimension. And that's what all my work in the last 20 years have been, is that it's not only these distorted thoughts that are important, but your motivation. And when people are kind of perfectionistic, you almost take a pride in beating up on yourself and that type of thing. And so what we do, I've developed about 20 new techniques to reduce resistance, but they're paradoxical techniques, because I actually try to sell the person on what's awesome about their self-criticisms. And before I try to change the self-criticisms, like last night, uh, I said to this woman, well, maybe we shouldn't try to get rid of all of your self-criticisms, for shouting at your kids. What does it show about you that's positive and awesome, and what are some beautiful things that it shows about you, and what are some benefits of beating up on yourself like this all the time? And I just jotted them down on this piece of paper.
Yeah.
uh, I wasn't treating her. She was in a beta group for the app, and we
Mm.
were just getting feedback. What did you like, and in the part that you tested this week. But she came up with this list of what is her guilt and her self-critical thoughts, like telling herself, "I'm a bad parent, and because I get impatient and yell, and this is all my fault." And first, it shows that she and I came up with this list together, but so shows that she has high standards, uh, and uh, and that she really cares about things, and it shows that she's aware of her faults and honest about her faults, and that her faults matter to her. And it shows that she said, it shows I care about how my children turn out, and I don't want to be having a bad impact on my kids. And my guilt shows my love for my children, and beating up on myself. And it drives me to find ways of doing better, and reducing this aggression problem I've had my entire life, getting mad and flying off the handle, probably not just at her kids. And hanging on to this guilt and self-criticism shows my persistence, and how I'm determined to improve and to find a solution to the problem. And it shows that I want to be a model of a real mother, and that I have flaws, and for the kids to see that they'll have flaws too, and that they can still love me, and I can still love them, and I can say, I feel so bad, I apologize when I kind of fly off the handle. Sometimes I need a little more support from you kids, because I'm a single mom and I'm overwhelmed sometimes. And her guilt shows that she's a very moral person, has a moral compass. And we came up with other benefits, you see, the positives of what she thought was a bad thing. Like, she was trying to get rid of her guilt. See, everyone who's depressed thinks it's bad, so they're supposed to get rid of it, and this makes you feel ashamed and intensifies the depression. Then I said, well, gosh, given this list, maybe we shouldn't be working on this. Because these are beautiful and awesome things about you, and these are real, and they're powerful, and they're true. So maybe that self-criticism isn't something that we should be working on. Now, that's the opposite of what a normal shrink would do. See, shrinks of all persuasions are taught to help and rescue. And
Yeah.
this is the exact opposite, siding with her subconscious resistance in a flattering and genuine way. And then she, what typically happens, the patient says, oh yeah, but no, I really want to get rid of this. Please help me if you've got the tools. And
Yeah.
now, instead of me trying to sell her, she's trying to sell me something. And that's the whole secret of the new team CBT. And I said, well, how guilty have you been feeling lately? And she said 75%. And I said, well, you know, maybe we could just dial it down a little bit. How the guilt is a good thing. Um, but how much would you like on a 0 to 100? If you had a magic dial, and she says, "Oh, I think 25% would be plenty." And then I said, "Well, great, great.
Yeah.
So now how are you going to deal with this thought that you're a bad mother?" And she said, "Well, maybe I can just tell myself that I'm a single mother, and uh, it, life can be pretty overwhelming and hard for me sometimes. And while I do sometimes fly off the handle, I do tons of loving things for my kids too. And even when I fly off the handle, we talk it over and brings us closer closer together." And she suddenly had like wisdom,
Yeah.
and just blew her negativity out of the water, and just felt immediate relief. And that took like about 10 minutes. Uh,
Yeah. And that's one of the things I was thinking about when you were describing that is this is clearly a very successful treatment for depression and anxiety. What about things that are more ingrained, like personality disorders, and especially I'm talking about like narcissism, psychopathy, pedophilia, people who are malicious. Like, is there any way you
yeah.
can get them to re-examine beliefs and cure themselves?
Well, the I only work with people who ask me for help with something.
Hmm.
I'm not trying to change the world, and there are some things I'm really good at, and some things that I would not know how to good at to deal with. Like I think things like sexual addictions, like pedophilia, are very, very challenging because they're intensely addictive, and generally the person doesn't want to give up something that is an addiction. And I have tools for habits and addictions, but I would say that it that's a lot tougher road than working with depression and anxiety. And sometimes depression and anxiety for certain people can be still very challenging to treat. But on my website, there's tons of free resources, and there are new tools for dealing with any kind of habit and addiction. There were 2 chapters that I had to take out of my new book because it was so long. I had to remove 9 chapters, even, and it's still a pretty big book, but to get it shorter. But I've put them on my website, and if any listeners are struggling with binge eating or a sexual addiction or any kind of habit or addiction, and you're interested in getting over that and changing your life, you can go to the homepage of feelinggood.com and go to the bottom of the homepage, and then it says, if you like these two, it says you get one unpublished chapter from David's new book, but actually you get 2 chapters on habits and addictions, but they're all focused on motivation. And rather than trying to persuade the person to change, I say, like, let's say you're overeating. Well, I use a technique called the triple paradox. And I would have the patient in three columns. In the first column, what are some of the benefits to you in binge eating? And again, most therapists don't go down that route, but the patient can come up with at least 10 or a dozen wonderful things about binge eating, because it's fun to pig out on your favorite food, and it can be a comfort when you're bored or feeling down, and on and on. And then in the middle column, once we've done that, I say, now, what are some of the disadvantages of diet and exercise? If you want to lose weight and then we'll list all of the horrible things about dieting and exercise. And then in the final column, which is the triple paradox, it's what does your habit or addiction show about you that's positive and awesome? And again, this is not what they're used to. Like your binge eating shows that, well, you want to give yourself pleasure. And it makes you happy. And the Dalai Lama says that happiness is the purpose of life. So when you binge eat, you're doing a profoundly spiritual thing. and you're showing love for yourself, and life is short and rude, and why not enjoy it? And so we come up with this list of all the reasons to keep binge eating. And then I say to the patient, well, gosh, maybe I don't see why you'd want to change, given all these positives. And this is the first honest approach to addictions, because that's why the person has the addiction, has the habit, the overeating habit.
Right.
And then oddly enough, when I show them how great it is, uh, and I don't try to help them, then I would say at least 90% of the time they say, "Oh yes, but please, Dr. Burns, I really want to give this up." And then I say, "Okay, now that's fine. Did you need my help with that?" And they say, "No, I think I know. I have a weight loss thing I'm going to do." And then they go out and do it. It's really interesting. It's focusing on the motivational component, which is big in depression and anxiety, but it's a total issue in habits and addictions, and an almost total issue when you're working with relationship problems too, because people also get addicted to blame and arguing and being angry and being in conflict with people. So I would say addictions and relationship problems are generally slower than treatment of depression and anxiety, because that resistance to change, the motivation to continue, can sometimes be overwhelmingly powerful.
I see. And one of the things I wanted to ask there, w- when we were talking about earlier on certain things, like a lot of therapy not being effective at all. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on even like the concept of personality disorders. Seems,
Oh, personality disorders. Well, I developed TAME because of personality disorders.
yeah,
Like in the early days of my practice, you see, I went to Beck's weekly seminar. Cognitive therapy was brand new. I decided to leave my tenure track position at the medical school and open my own private practice. And Beck, at the same time, opened his Center for Cognitive Therapy. We were both in the same building, the Girard Bank building across the street from the University of Pennsylvania. And he started referring patients to me. And I thought, oh, that's great. He must think I'm a great therapist. And almost all the patients that he referred had a severe borderline personality disorder, which is considered just about the toughest personality disorder, although, narcissism can be challenging uh, and so forth. But I was very flattered, but I realized that conventional cognitive therapy sometimes wasn't enough for these patients, and they needed more empathy and more focus on motivational issues. And that's how the new team therapy evolved, both from my research on the data I was collecting in my private practice, and also my observations. Uh, and so team therapy is specifically designed for patients with personality disorders. Um, But what I didn't know at the time, I later found out that he wasn't referring all these patients because he thought I was a great therapist, but because they didn't want them in the Center for Cognitive Therapy because they're so challenging to treat and kind of stressful for the therapist. But yes, but I don't treat anything in the DSM.
okay,
Uh, I only treat human beings, not labels.
right,
You see, and a personality disorder. Oh, you have narcissistic personality disorder. You have, histrionic personality disorder. Well, what does that mean, really? And all I treat people with is what they want help with.
mhm,
And generally, the patients that I've had with borderline personality disorder, what they want help with is their depression. And what my research showed is that if those patients decide to work with me, they will recover from depression at about the same speed as patients without borderline personality disorder. And I published that finding in the top psychology research journal, the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology, in the mid 1990s. But working with those kinds of patients uh, sometimes does require a higher degree of therapist skill, because they'll be opposed to doing psychotherapy homework typically. They'll be prone to creating conflicts with the therapist, and so forth. And it's the same with like a narcissistic patient. I kind of love narcissists because I myself am narcissistic. It's one of my many shortcomings, and one I've been working on for a long time. And sometimes I have to pay a price for my narcissism. My wife points it out all the time, so she helps me become aware of that. But I really like narcissistic patients, and so I give them a lot of stroking and compliments.
Nice.
And so they really like working with me because they sense that I like them. But I'm not treating their narcissism. I'm treating what they want help with. And that might be a problematic marriage, or whatever. So I'm not kind of on a crusade to change people
That's
based on some diagnosis. And let's say a patient has obsessive compulsive disorder and they're washing their hands 50 times a day because of the fear of germs. Well, that's something that can, in my experience, be easily treated. In fact, I had a podcast on that exact problem and featured a woman that I cured. Really, cured is a fair thing to say at my Tuesday training group in front of the class, and it really kind of permanently ended her 25 years with OCD and cleaning rituals. It was very dramatic evening, uh, because once she decided that she really wanted, to change, and I said, well, then you're going to have to confront your worst fear now, and yourself is going to die. Are you ready? She said yes. So I took the seminar group out, and we went into the ladies' bathroom, like 30 students, and I said, you have to start touching this toilet seat with your hands. And she said, oh no, do I have to do that? I said, yes, you must do that. And she said, well, you do it first. So I started touching it, and then she got into it. She started touching it, and then she pulled the toilet seat up and started touching the inner bowl. And the students were saying, oh, this is awful, type of thing. And she said her anxiety went up to 200%. And then I said, well, we're not done yet. Now she was afraid of touching doorknobs more than anything else, and said, we'll go out to the front of the building. We'll touch all these doorknobs along the way. That was freaking her out. Then we finally went to the front door. That was her greatest fear. And she had to touch the glass and the door handles, all these people going in and out of the building. And then we went outside and found this empty trash barrel that had about a millimeter of grime inside of it. And I said, now you got to put your hands in here.
Oh,
And she said, I'll vomit. I said, well, that's even better. Put them in there and vomit all over them. And then she said, oh, I can't. I said, yes, you can, and you must do that now. She says, well, I'd like to see you do it. So I put my hands in and rubbed my face. And then she put her hands in, and one of my students had his iPhone and took a video, a 30-second video of it. And she did it, and then everyone started cheering, and we went up to the seminar room, and I said, how are you feeling now? And she started crying and says, Dr. Burns, I'm cured. I'm not afraid of dirt and germs anymore. And then she drove all the way home, 2 hours from Stanford, without washing her hands, and now she's been great ever since. But make long story short, she asked me for help.
yeah.
But if I have another patient with a germ phobia, and they don't want help, I'll say, well, no problem. God bless you. You've probably got the cleanest hands in Los Altos. And is there anything you do want help with?
Yeah.
And that was a huge turning point in my career when I made the decision not to try to save people, but to help people with what they wanted help with.
I see. And we're almost at an hour here. I know you're a busy guy. The last thing I wanted to ask you is neuroscience is making huge advances. Uh, what do you see the future of therapy being?
Well, I think the therapy's got a pretty strong future. A neuroscientist wrote one of the chapters in my book, Feeling Great, Professor Mark Noble from University of Rochester, and he started out, I think he's the father of stem cell research, and now he's working in the area of neurochemistry. And he said that if you had to design a therapy based on how the human brain works
Yeah.
and to cause rapid changes, it would be Team CBT. And he argued that when we do externalization of voices and have the patients focus on one moment when they're upset, what were your negative thoughts, and then we role play and do role reversals and crush those thoughts. He says that's actually changing circuits in the human brain. And he said it's like selective neurosurgery. We activate the exact circuits that cause this patient's depression, and then we change those circuits. And but I think there will be great advances eventually in how the brain works. Amazing discoveries will be made. I'm very excited by that, but I have a feeling that the skillful psychotherapy, which is not like most psychotherapy, is not skillful, but skillful psychotherapy is still the fastest and most powerful way to change the human brain.
There you go. David, I'm very grateful that you took the time to talk to me. And I think this was really positive for a lot of people. People can get your book, Feeling Good, Feeling Great. You get your website, feelinggood.com. Is there anything else you want to get out there?
No, that's about it. Just thanks so much, and I hope you got some nice responses to the show. And it's just an honor uh, to meet you and to exchange ideas with you. I can't thank you enough, and keep in touch.
Absolutely. All right, David, take care.
Okay, bye bye. Thanks.
Bye.